But other
We're just breaking out of that story because we're going to take you to Melbourne now, where Greens leader Bob Brown is speaking to the media about poker machine reform.
There's now a national debate. There's the mobilisation of millions of dollars to fight the mandatory pre-commitment scheme that we're seeing particularly in New South Wales. But Richard Natale's been doing a lot of work on this and is putting forward now the option which the Greens have held for a long while of limiting the bets on poker machines to $1. It's a good, sensible option. It's one that everybody involved should look at seriously. It's one we think has advantages to everybody who's affected by gambling policy and the need and the absolute, I think, indisputed need for reform to deal with the huge problem of gambling addiction. I'll hand across to Richard and then we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Bob. Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk about what we think is a terrific initiative. We've got a huge problem with the gaming industry in this country. We've got problem gamblers who contribute in the order of $5 billion to government coffers, part of that contribution to the industry as well. $5 billion from problem gamblers is a huge problem. So we need to do something about that. We've got on the table a reform that essentially says we're going to limit the amount that somebody can lose to $1 per spin. That means that all machines would be low-intensity machines in clubs and casinos. We want to ensure that the maximum jackpot is $500. That limits the volatility of machines. And we say that we should only load machines up with $20 at a time. So that provides a bit of a circuit breaker for somebody who is in the zone, who's gambling. They have to reach for their wallet. They can't front-end load a machine with hundreds of dollars and essentially continue to gamble. Look, it's an important reform. It's a reform that means that what is at the moment an industrial-scale industry, initially formed as a casual means of entertainment, losing $100, $200 an hour, has now transformed into an industrial-scale industry where people can lose many thousands of dollars. In the hands of problem gamblers, Australia's high-intensity machines are essentially lethal weapons. People lose their homes, marriage breakup, huge social costs from this industry. Under our proposal, we wouldn't need mandatory pre-commitment. All machines would be low-intensity machines. Now, in terms of what this means for the clubs, well, clubs are saying that mandatory pre-commitment is a problem because of the huge upfront cost in the order of $3 to $5 billion they state. Under this policy, that cost simply wouldn't exist. There'd be a very, very small cost in changing these machines, an almost negligible cost because the capacity to do that exists already. So we're saying to the clubs, you're worried about a $3 to $5 billion cost? Well, under our proposal, that no longer exists. The second issue that the clubs are maintaining is that mandatory pre-commitment actually means a licence to punt. Well, again, under our policy, that issue no longer exists. People will continue to gamble on the pokies, won't need a card. Remembering that most people who gamble, most people who are recreational gamblers, 90% of them gamble as though machines were low-intensity machines anyway. So 90% of recreational gamblers won't notice the difference. They'll go in and continue to gamble in the same way they always have. But for those people who have a problem with gambling, this is a policy that essentially minimises the harm. It won't eliminate the problem altogether, but it will have a significant impact. In our view, it will bite more than mandatory pre-commitment. It's a recommendation that comes from the Productivity Commission. It's a recommendation that was also part of the Joint Select Committee on Gambling. And it's supported by a number of advocates in this area, people like Tim Costello, Uniting Care, Charles Livingston, academics, people who work in this area, all support limiting losses on poker machines as their preferred option. And I do note that Andrew Wilkie had this on the table as his preferred option in negotiations with the government when he first discussed poker machine reform. So it's a great initiative. It's simpler. cheaper and more effective than mandatory pre-commitment, and we're really pleased to be able to announce it today.
Without the mandatory pre-commitment, what's to stop people from just putting $20 after $20 after $20?
That will potentially continue to happen. We know that there's no magic bullet. What we do know is that the potential to lose large amounts of money over a short period of time no longer exists, and that's the biggest problem for individuals who have an issue with gambling, who have problems. What happens is the losses are limited to about an average of $120 per hour, rather than at the moment where people can lose several thousands of dollars each hour. So it limits the harm. It won't get rid of problem gambling altogether. No policy will, but it will have a significant impact. It will reduce the harms from gambling, and particularly for problem gamblers. So in that respect, it's a very effective policy.
Have you had any indications from the government or Mr Wilkie yet ahead of this announcement today?
Mr Wilkie, Senator Xenophon, the independents, the government are all aware of this policy. They understand that this is something that's come out of the Productivity Commission. They understand that there's good evidence for this policy. It's really going to be up to them. I note in media reports this morning that Andrew Wilkie has said he's open to this, that this is an issue he may consider. In my view, the government really needs to consider it. It means that the clubs no longer can use the line that they've been using, that mandatory pre-commitment is a licence to punt. Under this policy, people don't need a card. It's a simple, straightforward, effective initiative. And it also means that, again, the issue that the clubs industry have, which is the upfront cost of mandatory pre-commitment, they say in the order of $3 to $5 billion, well, that cost disappears. So we think it's a really good initiative. We think the clubs industry should welcome it because their two major criticisms against mandatory pre-commitment no longer exists, and we think the government should strongly consider it.
If there's agreement, is there a chance, Senator Brown, that this could actually get through the Parliament quite quickly? Could this legislation come up pretty soon?
Well, it'll be a matter for legislation next year because the sheer weight of items on the schedule of the National Parliament and the limited 4 weeks more sitting time doesn't allow for this to be properly canvassed. It will inevitably, for example, go to a Senate inquiry so that the public, and that includes clubs and NGOs and organisations dealing with the problem of gambling addiction, will be able to bring their input into the legislation. But it is a circuit breaker. It's a it's a $1 option, but a multi-billion-dollar circuit breaker. As I'll just wait a second. It's a $1 limit option, but a multi-billion-dollar circuit breaker. As Richard has just explained, the clubs will be, if they back this option, will avoid that $3 to $5 billion change cost of changing machines, which they've used as a major argument against the mandatory pre-commitment option that Andrew Wilkie and the government and Senator Xenophon have been looking at so far. So it's got a lot going for it, and it's really important that not just the clubs but the opposition ought to be looking at this. I heard Senator Joyce this morning on Melbourne radio talking about the reality that this is a problem. I think there's across the board a feeling in national politics that we have a responsibility to tackle this problem. So I think for Tony Abbott and the coalition, there's a real challenge here to come in behind this option as well.
The clubs will still argue, though, that this will hurt their bottom line and it will hurt their income, particularly the smaller clubs.
Yeah, there's no doubt some clubs will, and potentially the casinos and state governments will see a loss in revenue, but this is very well targeted so that loss in revenue is not going to come from the 90% of ordinary gamblers who put a few dollars through the machines each week, but the ordinary gamblers who put a few dollars through the machines each week, but the problem gamblers, because it's going to mean more money's kept in the pockets of addicts, and therefore less money is going to be lost with all the massive social consequences that Richard's just outlined.
Have you spoken with Mr. Wilkie, or did you personally about this?
I'll let you...
He's aware of the proposal, so I've given him the courtesy. I've given Andrew Wilkie, I've given Andrew Wilkie, Senator Xenophon, the Independents, and the government the courtesy of understanding what our proposal means. Senator Xenophon, who's been a long-time campaigner in this area, is on the record as saying that this is a good initiative. Andrew Wilkie proposed this to the government initially when he wanted to tackle poker machine reform. It's going to be up to them to decide what outcome they choose to go with. That will be their call, as it will be the government's call. But we think it's really important that in a very toxic debate, particularly with the clubs running deceptive and misleading a campaign in the way that they are doing, that we put another option on the table. It gives us more chance of success. Having a second option like this gives us another option for success when it comes to poker machine reform. We think it's an opportunity to provide a bit of a circuit breaker, as Senator Brown said. It means that the clubs can no longer argue that the upfront cost is going to be an issue. It also means that ordinary gamblers won't be detained, according to the clubs, who will be otherwise not interested in mandatory pre-commitment, and therefore they claim they'll lose revenue from ordinary punters. Well, under our proposal, that won't happen. There's no card, there's no mandatory pre-commitment. In the end, putting another option on the table means we've got a greater chance of getting poker machine reform, and Andrew Wilkie will make up his own mind, as will the other independents and the government.
Is there room for compromise on the $500 jackpot limit? Because you can see that from the club's perspective that might be a stumbling block, because they like to promote their jackpots and things like that, and casinos as well.
Look, the important thing to remember with jackpots is that the higher the jackpot, the greater the volatility, and the greater the likelihood that people will get into trouble with problem gambling. So that $500 limit came from the Productivity Commission. It's evidence-based. It's based on some really important work done by the Productivity Commission. We think that's the right limit, as we think limits with $1 per spin and ensuring that $20 is how much you can load a machine up. So we'll stick by those proposals. Of course, we're happy to negotiate with Wilkie, with Senator Xenophon on any aspect of poker machine reform, but we think this is the right approach, and we'll stick by it.
Do you hope that...
Can I just ask you, what's the mood amongst the Greens at the moment, given what's transpired this week, obviously with the carbon tax and asylum seekers? A mood of optimism, or...?
There is a mood of optimism, and that the hard work the Greens put into getting outcomes in the national arena is having some success. I congratulate the Prime Minister and Mr Combet and the others, the Treasurer, for the hard work they put into getting this nation the outcome on carbon pricing with the carbon package, which is going to be good for the economy, and a much better option than Tony Abbott's alternative, which would cost households $1,300 each by the end of this decade, while rewarding the polluters. So we're very pleased with that. The asylum seeker issue has been mired now in the political mess of the opposition and government's making, because they haven't come to the real conclusion at the end of the day that onshore processing is the best option. It's the most humane, it's legal internationally, and it's the cheapest. It saves taxpayers billions of dollars. We have always held this was the right way for Australia to go. Every equivalent nation has internal and domestic processing of asylum seekers. We would like to see the number of refugees that Australia takes aboard increased, so that we take some pressure off the need for asylum seekers to get into boats, so that they have a better opportunity from abroad to come to Australia. And we need, as the Prime Minister said this morning, much more work in the region to help to see that asylum seekers are properly and adequately processed and humanely processed in other countries in our region.
We've heard this morning reports that another boatload is actually about to depart from Indonesia. Do we need to come up with a solution quickly?
Well, we've got a solution. The Greens have that legislation. Sarah Hanson-Young's got that legislation in the Senate, which is to have people processed quickly in this country, to take children out of mandatory detention, to end the appalling conditions in which some asylum seekers find themselves. She has word that another 2 asylum seekers tried to commit suicide earlier this week in Northern Australia. We want to end that and ensure that, by the way, the big deterrent is that if people are not genuine, they get sent home. We do that with people who come here by plane. We should do it the same with people who come by boat or whatever other means, if there are any, they might find.
Julia Gillard hasn't ruled out or says she will try to get the Malaysia solution up again. Do you think she'll have the same result, or she'll have luck next time?
I think, look, Prime Minister Gillard's wrong on the Malaysia solution. Opposition Leader Abbott is wrong on the Nauru solution. The Greens are right and have majority public opinion with us in saying, let's have the Australia solution. Let's have a real fair go Australian solution here. And it's not only the asylum seekers, but it's Australians who'll feel better as well. I think there's now the opportunity for the government and the opposition to not only ensure that people are safely processed in this country, but it's done so humanely and with international standards, and that's what the Greens will be campaigning for in the Parliament and in the public arena in the coming months.
Australia's major clubs have apparently got a $40 million war chest to fight those gambling reforms. Are you ready for a fight?
I think the Richard Di Natale's option that's being put forward here, as he's explained, it's long-held Greens policy, but it's also been entertained by all the major players in the past. And so I think the club should take this aboard, and they'll save $40 million up front. Maybe they could put that into helping some of the people in the community who are affected by problem gambling. Win, win, win.
Have you had suggestions, apparently, from a Labor MP that Julia Gillard's considering a conscience vote on gay marriage?
No, I haven't, but I think that's a matter that the Labor conference may be looking at in the coming weeks. What I think is that Tony Abbott should entertain a conscience vote here. What a prescriptive and nasty thing for him to be saying, I won't allow members of the coalition to have a free vote with their conscience on backing the equal marriage, same-sex marriage. That's pretty base politics. And the members of his own party room ought to put him in his place on that and say we're not going to be restricted on an issue that's so important and where public opinion now is so firmly in favour of us getting rid of discrimination in marriage laws. How dare the alternative Prime Minister dictate that the members of his party must vote against their conscience on this issue, and many of them are enlightened enough to want to get rid of discrimination. A real challenge to Tony Abbott there. I think there should be a free vote on the issue, but I think his engineering effort, of his political engineering to try to have this popular measure fail, needs taking on.
Senator Brown, we all remember your reaction when George W. Bush addressed the Australian Parliament. Will he be welcoming Barack Obama? I've
made it clear to the Ambassador and everybody else involved we certainly will be welcoming Barack Obama to the country. And he'll have an enjoyable trip here. I'm looking forward to meeting him in Canberra.
Just one last thing with the gambling reform, sorry. Mm-hmm. You said that everybody knows about it. Is this new policy or...
It's long. Look, we're not prescriptive on this, but it's long been entertained by the Greens that we put a limit on the size of bets as a means of curbing the destructive outcome where problem gamblers can get onto high-intensity machines. We're looking at the option. We're not foreclosing on any option, but we think this is now shaping up as the best option, the best way forward.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Greens leader Bob Brown and the spokesman for gambling, Senator Richard Di Natale. They were launching their new policy for pokie reform that removes the